This MacBook is on its way back to the Apple Store. Want to know why? Watch this.
Check it out.
Alright, so why did I return the MacBook Pro? If you watched my review, you saw that I was pretty impressed with it, so it may not make a lot of sense without some context. Technically, it was a really good laptop. It was solidly built, but still pretty slim. It had plenty of processing power for anything that I did with it, from working with spreadsheets or other Google Docs, watching content, streaming music, and all the way up to photo and video editing. It also had a screen that was super sharp, color accurate, and nice and bright. And so far so good, right? That actually rhymed. Oh well. I also loved the new keyboard. Together with the M1 MacBook Air, it's the best keyboard that I've used on a laptop. Personally, I am a fan of the touch bar. I know some people prefer the actual function buttons, but I find that the interface is very user-friendly. I also like that the options change as you're using different apps and even while you're using the same app, depending on exactly what you're doing. I think it's a very clever way of using that real estate because you can repurpose the same space for multiple functions. Finally, the trackpad is the biggest and best trackpad that I've ever used. Okay, so still nothing wrong with the laptop. Then I did a comparison of the MacBook Air and the MacBook Pro. We know that the MacBook Pro has an active cooling system, which is a fancy name for a fan, and I expected it to result in a noticeable difference. So here's what I did. I made sure that I gave both laptops a fair chance. I used one and then the other exclusively for about a week while keeping notes about my user experience. I used the same apps to perform very similar tasks. Obviously, there were slight differences, so if I edited a video on the MacBook Air, I didn't edit the same video on the MacBook Pro, but I edited the next video I had. And before running any benchmarks or tests, I noticed that my experience with the two was virtually identical. Sure, the form factor is slightly different, and I do like having a display that's 25% brighter and a slightly larger trackpad, but the main noticeable user experience difference was the touch bar. I didn't really feel like I was getting the 25 to 50% performance increase, which is what I was hoping for. I was using the cheapest MacBook Air, the 8-core CPU, 7-core GPU version with 8 gigs of unified memory, and I was putting it up against the base MacBook Pro with an 8-core CPU, 8-core GPU, and again, 8 gigs of unified RAM. The price difference between the two is $300, so if we're using the MacBook Air as a baseline, it's a 30% increase in price. But boot and wake from sleep times were the same. The apps launched quickly on both and they were extremely responsive when I used them. In my everyday workflow, I never really felt like I was giving anything up when using the cheaper MacBook Air. There was one area where I noticed a difference, and I'll get to that after quickly discussing the benchmarks. And stick with me even if you're someone who doesn't usually care about benchmark scores, because I'll relate it to actual use. Running Geekbench for both single and multi-core performance, I got very similar results, so no real advantage. Running the compute test with OpenCL, the Pro did outperform the Air by about 10%. I also ran Cinebench, which again for single core performance, the scores were very similar, and for multi-core, I saw about a 12% advantage for the MacBook Pro. In real life use, the only time I saw a noticeable difference was when rendering my videos, where the MacBook Pro was somewhere between 10 to 18% faster. So what does that mean to me? The single core scores are close enough, and the multi-core score difference certainly isn't mind-blowing. The render time advantage, while there, only saved me about 2 minutes on a task that I perform 2 or 3 times a week. And even if someone said that this could add up over time, it's not like I sit around doing nothing for the 8 or 10 minutes while waiting for the render to complete, so it isn't really a meaningful enough difference for me to justify spending an extra $300. Now, you may be wondering why the MacBook Pro is still here if I returned it. And that's a good question. Before I get to that, if you like what you've seen so far and have gotten value from this video, let me know by giving it a thumbs up. It helps the video and the channel, and it lets me know what kind of content you like so that I can make more of it. And if it's your first time here, hit the subscribe and notification buttons so you can stay up to date on all the latest Apple gear and tutorials. Alright, so what I did was pick up another MacBook Pro with 16 gigs of RAM to see if it will help further separate the Pro from the Air. And I'll have a follow-up video coming up in the next few weeks. If the answer is no, if my actual user experience is still close enough, then I would say that for the average user, the better buy would be the base MacBook Air with a 7-core GPU and then adding 8 gigs of RAM for a total of 16 gigs at $1,200. Or if you'd rather get the added internal storage, then get the upgraded MacBook Air version with the 8-core GPU and 512 gigs of internal storage for $1,249. Both options are cheaper than the base MacBook Pro and I think provide you with concrete and meaningful advantages such as doubling the RAM or doubling the internal storage. If you're a user who's going to absolutely push their laptops to its limits for prolonged periods of time, if you're looking for improved sustained performance with the help of the almost always silent active cooling system, if you prefer the touch bar functionality, the slightly larger trackpad, and then the brighter display, then grab yourself a MacBook Pro and consider getting additional RAM and at least 512 gigs of internal storage so that it can serve you well for years to come. For the majority of users, there's just not enough of a difference, and I think you get a better value with the MacBook Air. If you want to see more MacBook Pro and MacBook Air videos, check out one of these 2 videos, and don't forget to first click on my face to join the community. You know what I always say, buy it nice or buy it twice. Good luck and see you soon.